Fatherhood isn't easy, but in Autismland, it's a journey like no other. Join Mark DeGrasse as we explore the highs, lows, and everything in between of raising children on the autism spectrum. With real stories, practical advice, and a touch of humor, we're here to navigate this unique journey together. For dads navigating life on the autism spectrum, you're not alone.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dads and Autismland podcast, where we talk everything fatherhood, parenting, kids with autism, and kind of what it's like as a family to experience this new adventure that we're all on. Today I have a guest, Corey Michael. We're talking about his daughter, Evie, who's 5 years old. And also we're going to touch on, the whole family's experience with special needs, which ranges from Tourette's, ADHD, and also autism with multiple members within the family, which is very interesting dynamic and actually just interesting that you were all, kind of came to that realization, which is tough, especially when you get into adulthood. So welcome, Corey.
Hey, thanks, Mark. So good to be here.
It's funny because we already touched on a bunch of these topics, like I just said, but let's kind of start with let's talk about the whole family's journey into discovery. How you kind of realize that it might not, I don't know if it started with Evie, but maybe it was more of you than you originally thought.
Yeah. My family is a beautiful mess. The easiest way to say it. My whole family pretty much has different layers of neurodivergence. And so I have Tourette syndrome. You probably won't see anything from me during this. I've learned how to kind of control it, but the tics and twitches and stuff. My wife is adult diagnosed ADHD. My sister is adult diagnosed autism, and getting diagnosed with autism as an adult is crazy hard. It took like 2 years for this entire process for her. We think my dad, who's passed now, was on the spectrum. He, like, looking back, we're like, man, he had so many behaviors. They used to call it Asperger's. They don't really call it that anymore. But that's what we kind of diagnosed for him. And so my daughter was born. She's 5 now, and we noticed I had a little fear almost immediately that she could be on the spectrum, because fear of the unknown, fear of like, just like, oh, I don't want to think about this right now. But she did not have great eye contact with us as a baby, and as they start to develop those fixations and skills to look at the faces of the people that there is interacting with them, she didn't really look us in the eyes. And so I was like, okay, we'll just kind of keep an eye on this, see if there's anything there. As she started to get older, she was on time with milestones like rolling over, starting to say some babbly words, laughing, those kinds of things. But her speech was delayed, and her gross motor skills were fairly delayed. She walked maybe a little bit, like around, I think, 13 months, 14 months, somewhere around there. But gross motor skills of like grabbing things and being able to jump, like she couldn't actually jump at all until like last year when she turned 4. And so we, just saw these more developmental milestones not happening. And but she is incredibly inquisitive, very interested in how things work. So she used to do things like, when she was a baby, she would crawl, those little jumpers that babies would sit in. She used to crawl underneath it and like look up at it and just look at like the underworkings of it. And we're like, that's very interesting. It was like almost like she was looking at the mechanical, how it was made as a little tiny baby. And we saw that happening in more places in our life, that she was like very interested in that kind of stuff. She started doing some of the stereotypical arm flapping, stemming with, her arms going out to the side when she would get excited. She would take items and line them up, which is a very common stereotypical kids on the spectrum kind of thing too. Just the lining of blocks or toys or whatever. She did that from a really early age. And then we noticed one of my favorite things about these signs is so she was obsessed with like 20 stuffed animals that we had
Cool.
at our house, and she would always get all of them and transfer them from one place to another in the house. And then at night, she would want all of them on her bed with her. And she's 2.5 to 3. We would grab all of them, in one big armful. Literally, we had 20 of them, and we would put them on her bed, and she would, excuse me, immediately know which ones were missing. She just, I call it this, I don't know if there's an actual word for it, but mental inventorying,
Mm.
where like just based on the size and the shape of the animals, or just like a quick scan, like she just knew exactly what was missing from the living room or whatever, and it was fascinating. And so yeah, so those kinds of things are happening, and then we started having her watch um, different shows on like YouTube Kids that were colors and shapes and
Mm.
numbers. And when she was 3.5, she could actually recognize polygon and pentagon and decagon, and like she had a high remembrance for colors and the specific shapes and everything. So we're like, okay, we're pretty sure something's going on here. Then to cap it off, she had a lot of sensory issues. So loud noises, transitioning from activity to activity, especially things that she liked doing to things that she didn't like doing. She would have full on 10-minute meltdowns,
Mm.
or longer. And we were just like, we just didn't know what to do with that and how to help her. So we decided to look into getting her officially evaluated. We went through our insurance, which we're in California. We have Kaiser, and so they hooked us up with one of their internal providers, a child psychologist, and she did a 2-hour evaluation on just how Evie would interact with us during certain kinds of free play and structured play, how she would respond to certain kinds of foods, which is a whole other thing. Evie has very specific safe
Mm.
foods, like mac and cheese and chicken nuggets are like her two favorite food groups, um, which I know is for a lot of kids too. But yeah, we had her just observe all these different things, and she would tell us like, okay, say this to Evie, and we'd wait to see how she responds. And so she was officially evaluated at 2 years and 11 months, like just before her third birthday. And at the end of it, originally the diagnosis, or the intent was just to say, hey, does she have some kind of sensory processing disorder?
Mm.
Maybe she's on the spectrum. And the psychologist was basically like, yeah, she's she's definitely got sensory stuff, but she hits all of our criteria for autism spectrum disorder as well.
Mm.
So from there, we got connected to ABA, which I was mentioning before we started. That was somewhat helpful for us with the ABA therapy, with how it's structured and the prompting and everything. But ultimately, for our family, it just and Evie and the way she's wired, it just wasn't the best solution for her. Um, we are familiar with, and listeners may be familiar with, Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. So, acts of service, physical touch, gifts, service, and I'm forgetting what the fifth one is. Quality
That's all
time.
right.
Quality time. And for my daughter, the physical touch and the words of affirmation part of it are that is how she's wired, and like she needs those things. And for us, there were parts of ABA that felt restrictive for her, and it just devastated her. And so we stopped doing that, but we got her into, luckily, being in California, with it being, as more progressive in a lot of ways. It means we had more services available to us than several places. We got her connected in our school district to an IEP and some special education services, and she's been thriving with those. And so it's been really interesting to just learn how to adapt to her, how to redirect her, how to encourage her. But she is exceedingly empathetic. She's everyone's best friend. She is high functioning, very high functioning on the spectrum. Most people wouldn't know that she is on it. But yeah, she's extroverted as well, which is a little unusual too for kids on the spectrum. And she's just hysterical. She is imaginative, and yeah, she's truly a special little girl that we're blessed to have in our life, and just yeah, just figure out how to help her and encourage her and everything.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like, you went through all the steps. I love how you were able to, kind of try different therapies and start to qualify them based on the unique needs of your daughter. Because a lot of
Yeah,
times, well, a lot of people just think there's some solution out there, like, oh, we're gonna fix this, and a lot of people just don't understand that that's just not how it works. It would be
yeah,
great if it did, and I would love that to be the case where it's like we know exactly what to do and then you do it and it works. But it
yeah.
sounds like you went through the same thing where it's evaluation, it's trial and error, and a lot of people don't realize that about
Lots.
all conditions where it's like a lot of it is trial and error. There's nothing that's going to work for everybody. But it is neat that you were able to try ABA, because
Yeah,
it's kind of a controversial topic because my son, he's in full-time ABA. We found that it was the best thing for him. And
yeah.
but he is severe and he has retention issues where it's like you
Mm,
could show. I remember one of the times when I really realized like, okay, this is different, was we had my second son who is neurotypical, and I was sitting in the room with both of them, and I think one was 1 and one was 2. They're only 10 months apart. And Damien, our older one, was 2, and I was like, okay, I'm a capable dad. I'm going to teach my son how to open the door because we had never been
mm,
able to teach him how to turn a doorknob. And I was like,
yeah.
all right, Damien, watch me do it. I turn the doorknob, it opens, I close the door, and then I'm like, Damien, try it. And I put his hand on the doorknob and it just was not connecting. And I was like, there's
Mm,
just, it's just not happening for us. So that's how it kind of led us down a completely different path. But
yeah.
with all these changes, was that you kind of driving it forward, or how was what was the decision making like, and what were you thinking this whole time as you were kind of going through it?
Yeah, my wife and I were on the same page the whole time. We have been the whole time. She a lot of it. So my wife, being adult diagnosed ADHD, obviously had it as a kid, and she was bullied a lot. She was uncomfortable a lot. She struggled with school, and one of her worst fears is that Evie will not
Mm,
excel at school. And so I would say for my wife, progress has been a little bit more fear based than
mm,
anything. I don't even know if fear based is the right word. I would say like she doesn't want Evie to experience what she experienced as a neurodivergent, child. And so she's been really great at just like, okay, we need to call so and so, and we need to talk to this person, and we need to research this kind of stuff. And I've been like, yeah, heck yeah. And then my brain, so I'm a business owner, and we're Christian as well, so there's a mix of my brain is very tactical but also faith driven, and
mm,
so understanding that rhythm of you know of moving forward in a way that's going to be helpful, but also that trusting that all of this is in God's hands as well. So we're not trying to fix Evie from something broken inside of
mm,
her. We are adapting to the way that God created her. And in our initial diagnosis of Evie, I mentioned this before we started. I really like what the psychologist said. She said, everybody's brain is different. Evie does not have a disorder. It's called a disorder, autism spectrum disorder. Think of it more like a brain style. Her brain is wired in a very particular way that she just has, kids on the spectrum have a particular wiring, and there's a spectrum of what that looks like, but it's a brain style. And I love that. It's a reframing of instead of calling something that God has made as good as broken, it is reframing it as this is a gift to be understood and
mm,
adapted to, but ultimately embraced. And some of the most brilliant people in the world are on the spectrum. Like
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, we all know, are on the spectrum, and that's just something just to for parents of kids with autism to keep in mind is like your child is not broken, and you haven't done anything wrong. Like God is not punishing you, right? Or if
Mhm.
you don't believe in God, like the universe isn't punishing you. It's just the way it's just the way it is, you know.
Yeah.
And so we, like you mentioned earlier, like evaluation part of it. Like I'm a researcher, I'm an evaluator, and I always think like, okay, what's going to be the best move here for Evie? And just because something is generally accepted doesn't mean that's true for her. And just because something is not generally accepted doesn't mean it's not true for her, you know? So it again, trial and error. It's been physically exhausting, emotionally exhausting, spiritually exhausting. We've had those moments, my wife and I still,
Mhm.
knowing that like this is how God created our little girl. It's like, Lord, why? You know, everybody wants to know the why question. And we've just felt encouraged that like our story and our access to resources, like we're incredibly blessed for that. Um, but there are people in our lives that don't have the same kind of
Mhm.
access to the resources and to the support. And so that's something that I've kind of thought through this whole process as well, is like, okay, what is it I'm going through right now that I think would be helpful
Mhm.
for other people? So it's been kind of a dual approach. And we've had friends with kids on the spectrum that, that several months ago, there was a girl who my wife is friends with that texted her and was like, I need help connecting to
Mhm.
resources or something. They're up in another state, they're up in Washington, and her husband just ignored it as
Mhm.
anything at all, which is heartbreaking. And she felt alone in it. And so, we really try to balance the we're figuring this out, but how can we also help others at the same time understand their kid and get access to even limited resources, and or at least give them some advice, on how to move forward if they don't have anything immediately available to them.
Oh, I love that. Well, that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. It's actually one of the issues I had with the first episode we shot of this podcast because I was trying to explain that like it's painful to think about people who don't have the resources because I think about
Yeah,
the amount of money, time, and effort that we've spent on my son, and I'm like, man, if you were not dedicated, maybe you don't have faith, you don't have this belief that there is a greater cause to this, and also, if you are Christian, it's God doesn't make mistakes. Like
yeah,
that's part of what we believe, and so
yeah,
denying that and saying that, oh no, this was a mistake, this was a disorder that needs to be fixed, or but at the same time I also don't like when people come in and they're like, well, God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle, and so you should
right,
feel proud that you were given this responsibility. A lot of people
right,
struggle with that too, where you're like, what?
yeah,
Like, this is
totally,
you know but it's I think if you go back to that, like God doesn't make mistakes, then it's like, no, okay, well then that is this is a lesson I'm gonna learn, or it's a lesson that I get to learn, and that
yep,
my child gets to provide to so many more people who could now have a better understanding. And that's something that I try to push. It's a hard message where it's like, these children are gifts, like they are divergent from what we think is typical. And so if we can
yep,
understand this, how much greater could that be for everybody? And so I think that's a really good faith-based way to look at that, is that this is a gift for everyone. And
yeah,
it could be tough though, because let's talk about that, just the kind of hardships that you've had to go through where you're fighting
yeah,
through the diagnosis, or fighting through the perception of your daughter, like, oh no, she's not autistic, she's making eye contact, or she's
right,
extroverted, she can't be different. How do you kind of deal with that personally, and how do you kind of respond to it when that happens?
yeah. So getting any kind of diagnosis for anything puts you immediately into a grief phase. Just even if you choose to accept it, there's like the denial piece of it, like, am I overthinking it? Am I blowing it out of proportion? and just you go through the spectrum, and then you think, oh man, I'm gonna have to, all the way to the anger piece of it. Like I'm gonna have to deal with this for a long time, and then you reach acceptance. Acceptance is the key here, but getting to acceptance, like I would say, first allowing yourself to go through that process, however long or short of grief, it's okay because unless you uh, face those pieces of your human psyche head on, you're gonna find yourself resentful. You're gonna find yourself frustrated. You will find yourself at odds with your spouse or your significant other. You will find yourself questioning God, questioning life. You will want to make excuses for things, or there's any number of things that if you don't let yourself feel the feelings, not live there, not stay there, but go through the process, become better educated, talk it out with trusted people, maybe even a therapist. Which for me, that was actually something I did. I was seeing a therapist for a little bit, not just for this, but for some other things I've had to deal with in my life as well. Having somebody that was trusted and licensed, outside of just good intentioned friends and even pastors, like having somebody that is uniquely qualified to help you unpack what's in your heart and in your brain, is tremendously helpful. I could not advocate enough that everybody needs therapy.
No, that's what I say.
Yeah, and so I had to work through a lot of this. I even I don't think I've even told my wife this, what I'm about to tell you. So I'll have her listen to this. I remember a number of years ago, I was hanging out with some friends that I hung out with regularly, and one of the girls that was in this friend group, she worked with kids on the spectrum. This was 15 years ago. I had no concept of anything kid-wise or whatever, but she would just tell us all these stories about just the amazing things that these kids did. Like there was one who she worked with that could go to a claw machine and like see the toy he wanted and just get it on the first try, like stuff like that. And I remember just feeling so like inspired, like, man, God created these kids really cool. And I said out loud, I think it'd be really fun to have a kid that was autistic. And I look back on that now, and I mean, she pushed back immediately. She's like, don't say that." She's like, "You have no idea what you just said, what that actually means, because it is an incredibly difficult life. Like the parents that come in, with these kids that are severe, like there are so many challenges and just different things." And I remember just feeling like ashamed about that for whatever reason, right? But I was like, I didn't know what I didn't know. But I remember when my daughter was going through this diagnosis process, and I thought back to that moment, and I had that thought, did I speak this into existence? It, and there will be some Christians and some who have said things to me, things like, essentially like, the Christian, like you speaking things into existence that are not there. What's out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speak, power in the tongue, yada yada, right? And well, they're not wrong. Like I knowing now what I know, like that didn't cause anything, but that caused a piece of shame in me at the beginning, and I had to work through that. And so working through all of my personal stuff with it was the only way that I was able to be ready to help my daughter through all of her stuff, because she doesn't know what she doesn't know. She's learning and developing as normal kids do, and she just has this other layer that adds challenge to it, and ways you have to learn and adapt. Everything from she's 5. She is only partially potty trained. Like she can go number 1 in the toilet, but she can't go number 2 in the toilet. She has to wear a diaper for that still. This is like a major point of contention for us. Like, and she doesn't go anywhere else. She'll go at school sometimes, but she only goes at home.
Mm.
Like that makes it hard when she has to go to the bathroom and we're out in public somewhere and she just refuses to go. She is, because of her sensory stuff, when we go to public restrooms, like if my wife has to go somewhere and my daughter is with her, like the noise of the air dryer absolutely causes my daughter to have a
Mm.
meltdown in public, and like it's hard to console her. Sharing toys with her little sister,
Uh,
or really anybody, like she has a hard time sharing toys. I mean, who doesn't want to have issues with that as a kid? But it's hard for her, the transitioning from activity to activity. Like this morning, trying to get her ready for school. She woke up early. If you have to have routines set because they expect routine and structure. That's how they thrive. And if anything changes in that, it can throw off their whole day. So we've got a new puppy, super cute, little two and a
oh.
half months golden Shepsky. But he's waking up early to go to the bathroom, and my daughter is currently sleeping in our bed with us. And the puppy's in there with us, and so it woke her up early throughout the entire day.
Yeah.
And so it was really hard to get her ready for school this morning. It took 15 minutes longer than it usually might. She kept saying, "I feel sad." When we get to school, even her best friend couldn't cheer her up. And so, like her day, I'm fully expecting that when I pick her up from school later today, her teacher's going to say she had a hard day because that's
Mm.
just how it goes. Foods. Oh man, getting her to try anything new is like near impossible. Like she
Mm.
has 5 or 6 foods that she will eat, and like that's it. And we will try to introduce new things to her. ABA helped a little bit for helping introduce some things that she still eats today, but she's just not open to new things because we give her the same exact stuff for lunch every day, you know. And so there are so many aspects of just daily life that just continue to be challenging. And part of it too is just she's 5, right? So I don't
Yeah.
discount the fact that it's a normal 5-year-old thing to not want to do certain things and not want to eat certain things. And so we've got that that kind of standard deviation of acceptability. But we know that certain things will phase out over time more or less, or she'll be more open to things as she gets older and can understand things. But one of the ways that we've found, well, I guess 2 things that we found to help with this. One I mentioned already, having that structured routine. Like you can't undervalue that as a kid, as a parent of a kid on the spectrum. Like routines, everybody does better with routines, but particularly these kind of kids, just the way that their brains work. I remember when we were first learning how to help her transition. A couple of the ways that we did this are with timers. So we have this little timer on our phone that is like a little animal timer, and it counts down and reveals the face of the animal. And
Mm.
we would let her choose, like involve her in the decision making process, so she feels like she has a level of control. These kids feel out of control a lot, and so
Mm.
giving them some level of choice is helpful as part of the routine. So we get up at 7 a.m. She chooses. We'll give her 2 or 3 options of, do you want to wear this today, or do you want to wear this today? And we'll let her choose that
Mm.
for her clothing for the day. But so the timer has been helpful. Giving the choice has been helpful, and the verbal cues like, "Hey, we've got 10 minutes. Hey, we've got 5 minutes. Hey, we've got 2 minutes." So it's not a surprise to her when, okay, now we're gonna go do this thing. But I remember when we were first learning about all this process, it was so interesting. So we would say, 10, 5, 2 minutes, and we'd say, "Okay, Evie, it's time to go to school." And she would flip out still, even though we did the countdown and everything. She would hide, she would run away, which is, a typical spectrum behavior as well. The avoidance piece, and she would go and hide under the table. And we would let her just sit in it for a second,
Mm.
and then like 30 seconds to 2 minutes later, all of a sudden it was like a switch just flipped, and she'd go, "Okay, I'm ready to go to school." And she was like happy, not crying anymore. You would think it was her idea. And so we're like, my wife and I, we recognize this. We're like, oh, like it's literally taking her brain time to process this transition. And so we would build in extra cushion into our time, knowing that even after 10 minutes, there'd still be another 5 minutes at the end for her to, for her to catch up. And so we started doing that. That was a game changer for us, just in terms of like, again, accepting this is going to happen, knowing it's going to happen, not be surprised by it, not get frustrated by it, and then she would be ready to do whatever it is she needs to do. So all these little things that we've had to do to adapt to her. Um, Incidentally, my younger child, who's 3, who's neurotypical, um, all these same kind of things work for her too. So, like we've been able to use these kind of things to help, develop our younger kid as well. But yeah, again, it's
That's
been
amazing.
exhausting,
No,
but
no, I
it's
get it.
been amazing.
Well, it sounds like you guys, you're really doing, a lot of the steps, and it's, my wife and I went through a lot of that, but it was just longer. And so,
Sure.
number one, I want to say, yeah, don't stress about the potty train too much. I'm going to leave you with that because my son's 12 and still in a diaper, and we still have, we've been potty trained on and off since. I think we tried the first time when he was like 3 or 4, did it for a year, and then we tried it again when he was 8. And then when he ended up in, the ABA center, they're like, "Hey, we're going to work on some other more vital components first, so we're going to delay
Sure.
that." And so now I think we're a year and a half into again going through the process, which is, just as difficult. Well, actually, yeah, in some
Yeah.
ways it's probably more difficult because he's so big. He's like 170
Yeah.
pounds
Yeah.
and as tall as my wife. So yeah, it takes time, and honestly,
Yeah.
especially with the sensory issues, I know a lot of them, don't like the feeling, or there's other things that you can't even understand that goes
Yeah.
into it. So yeah, it can
Right.
take a while, and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. We're
Yeah.
hopeful we're gonna get it all figured out by the time he's like, 16 or something. That's
Sure.
our goal.
Yeah. You,
So so
absolutely.
you're doing great. The
Yeah.
fact
Thank
that
you.
she's already going, half of it, that's fantastic. The other thing is was about that guilt you felt about like wishing it into existence or thinking it into existence.
Yeah.
I don't think we have that kind of control. So, I don't think you have to
Exactly.
worry about that. But, just personally, because I really thought, like, what's my primary motivation in life? Because when I realized a few years ago that wasn't money, which I had convinced myself that it was money.
Mm.
And then I realized I'm like, oh, no, I just don't care about that. I
Yeah.
realized that my real, I don't know, objective in life is to have things be interesting. Like as a child, I was super bored with like everything. And I was just like, oh
Mm.
my gosh, like I just need things to be interesting. And so, and that's kind of, and I'm like, I couldn't get more interesting than my life now, thanks
Yeah.
to my son and different situations. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a great way to look at it, though. Even your perspective back then of like, did I wish into existence because I thought it would be, interesting or, whatever it was to have an
Yeah.
autistic child. I'm like, now I think that says a lot about your character that you would even think that because a lot of people just want everything to be perfect, right? They're like,
Yeah.
oh, if it's not perfect, then there's something wrong and I need to
Right.
fix it. And then you see these, neurotypical, or maybe they aren't, obsessing over these things when they aren't exactly how they think they
Yeah.
should be. And it's like, well, number one, you're claiming way too much control, and a
Yeah.
lot of this stuff is out of our control, and we're just
Right.
simply adapting to it and trying to find our way through it. Nothing wrong with that either. So I think you're doing a great job, and understanding the structure component is huge, and then
Yeah.
working through it because a lot of this stuff, we talked about the trial and error process, but the experimentation that you have to do to figure it out. Because what you don't realize with an autistic child is they can't tell you things like neurotypical child with
Yeah.
language abilities can. You could say,
Right.
"Hey, Billy, what's wrong? What's going on?" Now, I will say that, and maybe we'll kind of wrap up with this component. But since your daughter does show that kind of emotion, like how do you weather that storm? Because as most guys, we never were taught how to deal with emotion. We taught how to repress emotion,
Yeah.
but actually, feeling it, and then especially with some autistic kids, and I'm sure your daughter's included here, they can sense it. They
Yeah.
know when you're feeling a certain way. So
Yep.
how do you do that kind of, self-regulation or I don't want to say control, but how do you process the emotions that come along with all these things happening?
Yeah. Well, I'll say that this is one of the reasons why I went to therapy.
Yeah.
It's because I was having some emotional issues, and I had to release. Yeah. So Evie is highly empathetic. She gets sad watching people get sad
Mhm.
in real life and in movies and in cartoons. We were watching Captain Underpants the other day, and like there's a part where one of the characters is sad, and she was getting upset, and we're like, "Hey, baby, it's okay. Like this is a cartoon. This is not real." But she just feels things so deeply. And this morning, when she was emotionally dysregulated from her routine being messed up, like she kept saying, "I feel sad, I feel sad." And I say, "Well, why are you feeling sad?" And she doesn't know how to express that. Still, she just knows she's sad, she understands that. And so we try to work on that with her. My wife wears her heart on her sleeve, so she's totally opposite of me. And so Evie, like, if my wife is sad and crying, Evie will be sad and crying, or feel frustration, or I mean, if we even look like we're angry, it just breaks her. And so that's I mean, that's something we've had to learn, continue to learn how to get right, and I wish I could say that I've figured out the answer to that that question. And the reality
I'd call
is,
you a liar.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, the reality is like it's still something we are trying to figure out. Again, my personality. I'm tactical. I'm a business owner, so I have a high risk tolerance, which means it's easier for me as well to experiment on different things with her,
Wow.
and like what works and what doesn't. And so I think I'm just again, I'm just wired that way, so that impacts how quickly we can move through things with her. And I'm not afraid to try something new if it's not working, after a period of time. My wife has a harder time with change, so we balance each other out that
Mm,
way. Um, my tactical approach to things, I will look at things more like data driven or logical,
mm,
and that is something I constantly fight with myself, to not expect my daughter to just like know, like, why are you sad? There's no reason to be sad. That doesn't mean anything to her
mm.
because
Yeah.
because
What's
she
the
just knows she's
effect?
sad. Yeah, and so that is like I move quickly on things, and I have to take things slow with her. This morning she just wanted me to hold her as she processed through her sadness for 15 minutes,
Mm,
and I had to just like, I'm like, we got to get to school. I don't want to be late. Like, I hate being late to things. I'm always early. But I was like, this is what she needs right now, and that's okay. Like, I need to operate at her level, and continually just like work on that. And something I remind myself often is like, it's kind of it's not morbid, but it's kind of cynical, I guess. But it's like, what are my children going to be in therapy for related to me someday?
yeah.
Someday,
Yeah. You know.
And I don't want it to be because, I was not attentive to their emotional needs or whatever. Like, I'd rather just be something silly, like, he made a weird sound when he chewed his food or something.
No, but
um,
well, the fact that you're so empathetic to even thinking about that side, because I think for me personally, I barely, yeah, I think about the future, but a lot of times I'm just like, hey, how do we survive like now and the
yeah.
next few weeks and then the next couple months and that kind of thing. But the fact that you're thinking that far ahead is actually really good. It's exhausting, I'm sure,
It is.
but you
Well,
can't help it. It's fine.
one of I saw this TikTok video once. It was one of the most impactful videos that I've seen. It wasn't about kids on the spectrum specifically, it was just about kids. It was a mom, and she's like, if you ever find yourself frustrated with having to read books over and over and over again, or having to pick up the toys, or just all these things about your toddler and your small child that just frustrate the heck out of you right now, think of yourself being 90 and
Mm,
being able to go back in time to these moments, would you do it? And I remember just thinking, it was just impactful for me thinking back, like how I will feel about this time when I'm 90,
Mm,
and how I will, as much sleep as I've lost, as frustrating as it might be to have to pick up toys all the time after telling them, like pick these dang things up, whatever, right? Like I would give anything at 90 to go back to when there's these cute, sweet, non-cynical, non-jaded, pure, joyful, empathetic humans that haven't yet been tainted by the war by the
uh,
world. And I would do any of it all over again. And that's really given me a perspective in the future focus aspect of like like how what do I want? It's cliche, it's silly for some people, but like what kind of legacy am I wanting to leave here? Like
mm,
what am I wanting my children to walk away with when I pass at whatever point that is? And tomorrow's not guaranteed. So what even right now, so I'm 36 now. I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. If I were to, God forbid, pass tomorrow, what are my kids' core memories going to be now that they're developing that they will remember
mm.
me for as they get older? And like that truly like shapes. I think about it every single day. Like,
Wow.
what do I want to be remembered by them for? How can I impact them in a positive way, even if I'm not always getting it right?
Yeah, no, that's a good way to look at it. Well, it really puts things in perspective. It's kind of, well, you could get the sense of it just by looking at your Facebook feed sometimes and being like, "Oh yeah, that was 5 years ago we did that, or that
Yeah,
was 10 years ago we did that." For me personally, like I try to, just focus on the moment. And a
yeah,
lot of times I'll look back and I'm like, yeah, that was okay. But a lot of times I look at my sons now and I'm like, I wouldn't change now for anything in the world either, because I really like, who they're becoming, seeing the development and wondering what they're gonna do next. And so
yeah,
yeah, and your kids are really young, and I was the same way, probably at that point. But as soon as they get into the like, 8, 9, 10, and then they really have these, fleshed out personalities, you'll start to find like, well, for me personally, I'm just like, oh my gosh, they're so much more interesting,
mm,
every single day that passes. So,
yeah,
yeah, no, so it'll pass. I think you'll be good, and then
yeah,
you'll be
yeah,
like, I'm looking forward to being 90, and I'm like, I'm
yeah,
not only I'm too tired and too incapable of doing anything at this point. So I
yeah,
feel relieved of the responsibilities. I am
yeah.
I'm into like
I
looking
mean,
forward.
hopefully, I'll feel relieved of the responsibilities when they're like, 18 and 20. Like,
Ah, you'll find out. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Corey. This has been a lot of fun. I love hearing about Evie, and it sounds like your whole family seems like really in tune with the mental health component, which is super vital. And I'm sure that's
yeah,
like we said, something to be thankful for having all that support, both professional and then just relationally, because I'm sure that makes a huge difference with navigating Autismland, which we're a part of. So
yeah.
thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it.
All right, you've been listening to Dads in Autism Land. For more content like this, please subscribe.